Welcome, everyone. In less than 2 weeks, millions of Americans without health care coverage will start signing up for Obamacare. Formerly, it's called the Affordable Care Act. But how affordable will the premiums actually be? The numbers are all over the map. Literally, it matters where on the map you live. We will mouse over an interactive map in a minute. Also on today's program, are we taking the NSA's mass surveillance programs too much in stride? Then Pro-Publica's investigation into New York's system of housing and rehab for indigent addicts. It alleges shoddy care and kickbacks. Finally, toward the end of the hour, a citywide, internet-wide art competition calls for a vision of the Big Apple in the year 2038, or 25 years from now. First, Obamacare. As part of our ongoing series, Public Intellectual, where we look at new research that affects our lives and public policy, we welcome Avik Roy, leading Obamacare critic, a senior fellow at the conservative think tank the Manhattan Institute, and blogger at Forbes.com. He and his colleagues have put together a new map that they say will help us track how Obamacare will hit our uninsured pocketbooks. Also joining us, veteran health policy journalist Trudy Lieberman. She's a frequent contributor to the Columbia Journalism Review and teaches public health at the CUNY School of Public Health. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for coming in tonight. And before we get to Avik's map, Trudy, just tell people who may not know, what is it exactly that they could do starting on October 1st if they're uninsured?
Those are the dates. That's the day that the exchanges open for business. And so people will be able to go online or work with any of the navigators in the various states. These are people who can help them choose a policy and decide on a policy that will help them stay insured for the next year. And that will help them, of course, pay for their health care costs.
And the policy would actually take effect January 1st, I believe, right?
Correct.
But they can start shopping October 1st.
Right. They can start shopping, and I should add that the shopping decision is not going to be a terribly easy one. This is going to be a very important decision for people who are uninsured now and for people who are now in the individual market who may want to switch policies.
And we will come back to you in a couple of minutes for some shopping tips if you're going on to the healthcare exchanges. But Avik, set up this map for us. You've put together a map state by state comparing what premiums are going to be tomorrow compared to what they are before Obamacare, and then also with respect to what subsidies people can expect?
What's important to understand is this map is focused on people who shop for coverage on their own. So today, the vast majority of Americans either get coverage through their employer or they get it through the government through programs like Medicare and Medicaid. The people who are uninsured, of course, and the small fraction of people who shop for coverage today, that's who these exchanges are aimed towards. And that's a subset of the overall population. And that's the population that we're trying to analyze here.
So we're putting this map up on the screen. And as you can see, folks, you can click on any state to look at some of these numbers. And I want you to look, too, before we click on New York, at the 3 different categories that you can look at with respect to each state. There's state rates, how much in each state, who qualifies for what kinds of subsidies, and then some help with your decision. So let's go to New York. Let's click on the Empire State. And Avik, what are we looking at here?
So what we've done is, and as you note, the darker shaded states are the states where the data is currently available. The light colored states are where the data is not yet available because the state governments, or mainly the federal government, have not released the information yet in terms of premiums on the exchanges for the majority of the states. So we're waiting. We should get that data in a few weeks. But for New York, we do have the data, and what we see in New York is that rates will go down for the average person in New York State by 29%. And now there's a couple of caveats to understand there. The first is that that's a statewide average. There's substantial intrastate variation in New York. So New York City will have lower rates on average, and the Hudson River Valley, particularly the Albany area, will see higher rates.
Why?
because there's differences in the insurance markets in those areas versus what they are today.
Which means people tend to be older and sicker in those upstate areas?
It can be a combination of factors. Part of it can be the hospitals in those areas and what the hospitals are charging insurers. Part of it can be the demographics, so who's uninsured, who's older, who's younger, who's healthy, who's sick. It's a combination of all those factors.
And before we get off this particular page, it is notable that the average premium would be the same no matter what age you are. You see, folks, if you look at the left-hand blocks, that's age 27, in the middle, age 40, at the upper end, age 64, just before somebody would qualify for Medicare. And you would think that insurance would become more expensive the older you get because you're in a higher risk pool, but that's not the case in New York?
So New York, since the Mario Cuomo administration, has required insurers to charge the same rates to people who are younger or older. The rates have to be exactly the same. It's called one-to-one community rating in the health wonk jargon. And what the effect of that was that because older people effectively had a subsidized rate, but for younger people it was a bad deal, younger people dropped out of the market. And so the price of individually purchased insurance in New York got increasingly expensive. And it's called the adverse selection death spiral, when young and healthy people drop out, older and sicker people stay in, and that's something that actually the Affordable Care Act will help assist with New York, because there will all of a sudden be all these subsidies, there will be the individual mandate, all these things that in theory should push younger and healthier people into the pool.
Right.
But still in New York, there will be exactly the same rates for younger and older people today as well as next year.
So what was left of the market responded to the regulation that everybody was going to pay the same rates no matter what age, by premiums going up relatively to what they had been for younger New Yorkers, because they had to help subsidize the care for the older ones, and then that got so expensive that a lot of younger New Yorkers who weren't insured in some other way just didn't get insurance.
That's the
what
key
you were
thing.
explaining.
When you require insurers to offer a certain set of benefits, or you regulate the design of the insurance product in a way that favors sicker people or favors older people, which is a proxy for favoring sicker people effectively, what you're basically doing is making that health insurance product more expensive for healthy people, whether they're young or old. I think that's the important thing. We talk a lot about the age element of it, but really what the age is telling you is their risk of sickness.
Right.
So when you're young, you're just in general healthier. When you're older, you're in general sicker. But healthy people in general are subsidizing older people under that model.
Let's go
Sicker people under that model.
to another state and compare it to New York, and you've chosen the state of Virginia. Or I should say the Commonwealth of Virginia.
The Commonwealth of Virginia, the Old Dominion. So Virginia is a state that actually represents much more what a typical state will see under the Affordable Care Act. As I mentioned, New York is unusual because 20 years ago under Mario Cuomo, the state enacted a lot of reforms or changes that really dramatically changed how individually purchased health insurance works in New York. Virginia has a more normal or typical insurance market for individually purchased insurance today. And what you see here is that rates go up substantially for younger individuals, 27-year-olds in this example, and 40-year-olds, but older people will see a slight decrease in their premiums on the individual market.
So Trudy Lieberman, this is such an interesting number for the 27-year-olds here. The premiums would actually, under the Affordable Care Act, become 67% higher, two-thirds higher than they are today for those younger people in their 20s. So does the Affordable Care Act make care, or at least insurance, more affordable if Virginia is a typical state?
Well, it does for people at the higher end, the older people. I should point out that relatively, they will still pay a higher premium than a younger person. That is often misunderstood, and we've seen a lot of press coverage where we see that older people are going to pay less. Well, they will, but they are still going to have an absolute, the premium they pay is going to be higher in absolute dollars than the younger person. So I think that we are seeing
Because the younger person's premium in a state like this is starting so low.
Exactly, because as Obi pointed out, they present to the insurer a lower risk because their health isn't generally better. So what we have going on here is a subsidization, a cross-subsidization that's going on from the younger person to the older person. And that is baked into the Affordable Care Act.
So one of the variables here is, will those younger people despite the individual mandate that we keep hearing about under this law, that is, they are required to buy the health insurance, will they actually buy the health insurance? Or will they take the tax penalty, which is the other option, and maybe actually much cheaper?
I think it's going to be some of both. I think you will see some young people going into the market to buy insurance, but I think that there is the risk and the fear that many of them will take the penalty. And we've seen that in the employer market, that employers who have offered insurance to their younger workers often don't take it. And that's kind of a problem. And the reason that they give is that their incomes just aren't high enough. And so that's going to become a factor. We talk a lot about averages in charts like this, but it's going to come down to an individual decision, what you're going to be able to buy for you at the time you sign up.
And this is where another piece of the Affordable Care Act comes in, which is the subsidies, the sliding scale subsidies to help people at different income levels who are not otherwise insured afford to buy these policies on the exchanges. Now let's see, Ovik, does the map deal with that?
So what the map does, we don't yet have on the third button there contains the would answer your question most directly, and we're still assembling that data and putting it on the map. But the second button does show you the percentage of people, generally speaking, in a particular state that will qualify for subsidies. If you click on the second button, then you click on New York, you'll start to see what I'm talking about. So you'll see these pie charts, and you can scroll down, and what this is showing you is on the left set of pie charts is the percentage of uninsured people within a particular age group that will qualify for subsidies based on their income level. And the orange means that you'll qualify, the yellow means you won't qualify. And on the right side, the right set of pie charts is a percentage of the overall population that will qualify for those subsidies. And so you'll see, for example, in the 21 to 30-year-old group, 44% of the uninsured will qualify for subsidies, and 11% of the overall population of the state of New York will in that age group. But the thing to understand also, as you noted, it's a sliding scale of subsidies. So even though the subsidies in theory range within a certain income bracket, so it's 138 to 400% of the federal poverty level, actually when you get to the upper half of that bracket, the slide of the subsidy slides down to an effect that those individuals who are perhaps in the higher end of that bracket will still see a net increase in their premium.
So can you put some real numbers on this for New Yorkers, Trudy? Let's say I'm an uninsured, healthy 30-year-old making X dollars versus Y dollars. What will it actually cost me to buy health insurance?
That is going to depend on the policy that you buy.
Aha, and there's one more variable. We should be clear about this. There are several policies available on each exchange with more or less coverage.
And just to be clear about what we're measuring on this map is we looked at the 5 least expensive plans today that are available in New York and the 5 least expensive plans that will be available on the exchange, because our thought was for people who struggle to afford health insurance, identifying the least expensive options was the most important consideration.
5 least expensive plans on the exchanges. So how many different plans? And how many different levels are there going to be on the exchanges?
There's 3 different levels. There's the bronze, well, the 4 different levels.
New York is 4.
There's bronze, silver, gold, and platinum, and there's also a catastrophic set of plans which are unsubsidized. So we left them out for the purpose of the discussion. But
okay, to answer your question, Brian, what we have here is people will qualify. About 60% of the people buying this market will qualify for a subsidy, which will range from quite a lot at the low income to not very much at the people who have incomes of 400% of poverty, which is about $92,000. So that's, fairly high income. So it's going to be this whole range.
So if I'm an average New Yorker making the average New York City income, which is I think about $50,000 a year, I'll get a pretty healthy subsidy to buy health insurance if I'm not otherwise insured?
You might. Now, what you're going to have to do when you get that subsidy is decide how you want to spend it. Do you want to spend it for a good policy, in which case you will pay more yourself, or do you want to spend it on a cheapie policy, in which case you won't have to pay very much on your own? And obviously in insurance, the more you pay, the better benefits you get. Now, the gold plan will cover about 80% of your health care costs, the platinum 90%, the silver plan 70%, and the bronze plan 60%. So if you decide you want a cheapy policy, the 60% policy, your subsidy might go far. If you want a better policy, your subsidy might not go as far. But there are many other decisions that you have to make while you're sort of contemplating whether you want a bronze, silver, or gold.
You have to take your best shot as to how much health care you're going to need over the next year, and that's always an unknown.
That is an unknown for most people, unless you have a chronic illness.
So give me your best guess as we run out of time. Ovik, 1 year from now, what percentage of the U.S. population will have health insurance compared to today?
Well, if you ask the Congressional Budget Office, they would say 7 million people will be enrolled on the exchanges at the end of the first year. One point I want to make, though, is that 90,000 figure that Trudy cited, that's for a household of 4. But the vast majority of uninsured people are young. They're under the age of 40. The household sizes are 1 or 2. And so the income levels collapse for those individuals. So the subsidies might be more like top out at $45,000 or $50,000 or $60,000 of income, which makes a big difference in terms of those young individuals and what they need to make in order to qualify for subsidies.
Prediction?
I'm not sure I can give you one.
If your prediction is right, 7 million additional people with health insurance, what percentage of the population does that still leave uninsured? Do you know it?
Yes, if you talk to the census, they'll say 50 million people, 51 million people are uninsured today. And of course, that's only on the exchanges. That's not counting the Medicaid expansion, which will add another 5 to 10 million, depending on which states finalize that.
The CBO estimates about 30 million will remain uninsured.
Thank you both
full
very much.
implementation.
I think you brought a lot of new clarity to a lot of people about this new world we're going to enter in a couple of weeks. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
It has now been 4 months since Booz Allen Hamilton contractor Edward Snowden began leaking to British newspaper The Guardian revelations about the National Security Agency's tracking of a large amount of our internet traffic and phone communications. Since his revelations were published, privacy lawsuits have been filed, legislation has been drafted, and review committees convened. Yet despite all of the rumblings, most Americans seem to be less concerned with unconstitutional behavior regarding privacy than the untoward behavior involving Miley Cyrus's private parts. So let's consider what's at stake. Joining us via Skype are Director of the Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research at Indiana University, Fred Kate, also Trevor Timm, Electronic Freedom Foundation activist. He is in San Francisco. Hello from New York to both of you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Fred, first question to you. There was something that I thought was incredibly surprising and maybe huge last Friday when the FISA court judge, Dennis Saylor, and FISA, for those of you who don't know, is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. This is the court that can approve listening in on things. Dennis Saylor, the judge, was quoted Friday saying that Edward Snowden has sparked an important debate on surveillance. So do you see this as an important milestone from a legal perspective?
Yeah, I think the decision last week, it came as a surprise to many of us. First of all, that the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court was even willing to consider a petition from somebody other than the Department of Justice. And second of all, that the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, really in a series of both public and official statements over the past few months, has become increasingly critical of the surveillance programs. What happened last week is the court went ahead and granted standing to the American Civil Liberties Union to pursue a case in which they are seeking to make public all of the FISA opinions relating to the Section 215, the so-called Verizon order that made the phone records available to the NSA on all Americans.
Trevor, you want to continue on this point? How important is this ruling and this statement from the bench in the FISA court?
Well, I think it's significant in a couple of respects. Number one, the U.S. has been pursuing Edward Snowden under Espionage Act charges and has, for a lot of this debate, really focused more on getting him than actually fixing the problems that he exposed. And so this is just the latest indication that they are now willing to admit that actually his leaks actually sparked an important debate. At the same time, the FISA court admitted this. The Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, also admitted this. saying he was loath to admit that Edward Snowden's revelation sparked an important debate, but he basically said that because this information came out, we can now have this discussion where we couldn't before. And this is the man that, it's the same man that was caught lying to Congress because of what Edward Snowden revealed.
So Trevor, to stay with you for a minute, why do you think this whole conversation is important to the average person? Because I think most Americans are kind of blasé about it. They don't think that their private phone calls or internet communications are being compromised in a way that actually affects them.
Well, actually, I would disagree with that statement. I think that may have been true over a year ago, or even just a few months ago before these disclosures started. But poll after poll has shown in the last couple months that there has been a significant shift in the way Americans view privacy and civil liberties versus the supposed security. Now there's a solid majority of people who think that the U.S. government is going too far in violating our privacy in the name of security. And there actually even larger majorities say that the Congress should curtail this phone metadata surveillance program where they're collecting every single phone call record on every single American, whether they're ever been accused of any crime or even part of an investigation.
So, Fred, can you identify any individual American who's ever been victimized by this? I mean, we may consider it creepy that the government on some level is knowing who we're contacting in one way or another. Has there ever been an individual or a business, let's say, that's actually been victimized by illegitimate use of this information?
Well, I think it's far more than just creepy. I mean, remember when the NSA behaves like this, it is doing some significant things which affect both individual Americans and American interests more broadly. I mean, first, when you lie to Congress and you lie to the public, you also are lying to your foreign allies. And so there's been a tremendous sense of undermining the reputation, the confidence that people have in the United States. We've seen a fair number of U.S. businesses who say they've had contracts canceled by foreign participants, by foreign partners, because of the fear of U.S. surveillance. We've had tremendous demands by foreign governments, the Brazilians, the Mexicans, the Germans. The Germans have gone so far as to call for putting a hold on trade talks with the United States until the NSA agrees to stop surveilling Germans. We've seen a weakening of security. You know, the NSA is responsible not just for spying, but also for securing our national infrastructure. And when it engages in the sort of activities that Edward Snowden's made public over the past 3 months, it certainly compromises that critical mission. And then the question of abuse as it affects individual Americans, you know, it's often years before that comes out, but just because we don't know about it yet, once you put that sort of power into the hands of the government in a secret environment, I think it would be foolish not to assume that abuse is going on.
Trevor, did you
know
want to
of more than 2,000 cases the NSA has made public in which NSA agents use the information in order to look up friends, lovers, relations of other friends, this sort of significant abuse of the power of the NSA.
Trevor, you were trying to get in to add something there?
Well, I think the recent FISA court orders that have been declassified because of EFF and ACLU's Freedom of Information Act lawsuits really hammer home this point. That the FISA court itself has actually said in its 2009 and 2011 court ruling that the NSA has misled the court so badly that the surveillance system has never actually functioned as the court has intended. The NSA has gone much farther than that and have done so many, many times. I mean, there was the most recent opinion that came out was just last week. It was from 2009. It said that the NSA was checking 18,000 phone numbers daily against new information coming into its call database. Only 2,000 of those numbers had the requisite legal requirements for them to actually do the searches, but they were carrying these searches on for years. So, you know, I think it's important to recognize that what the NSA has been doing, at least up until a couple months ago, has been done in complete secrecy. So as Fred says, if there are abuses, it's impossible for the American public to find out, and that's one of the real problems here. We should know immediately if these abuses occur, not find out years later.
Fred, recently there was a review panel set up by President Obama to consider reforms in the surveillance system, and I understand you attended that meeting. Were you at one of these meetings, and what was it like?
Yeah, yes, I was at the actually the first meeting that the review panel had, along with colleagues of Trevor's from EFF and other civil liberties organizations and other academics. And at this point, the review panel is really just in the collecting information role. It met with civil libertarians in the morning, it met with industry in the afternoon, and it's also solicited public comments. But there wasn't really much of a sense of what the committee's up to. It was really just collecting information from us.
When you say met with industry, do you mean telecommunications companies like Google and Facebook?
Yes. Let me say I wasn't at the industry meeting, but there have been articles about it in the popular press, and they met with both high-tech companies and also a broader variety of other U.S. companies.
Trevor, do you want to talk about that aspect of it? Because if these are the sites where we're actually having a lot of communications with other people, social media and searches and everything, are they pushing back against the government? Are they being surprised by what the government was monitoring on their sites? What's their relationship to this whole thing, especially as it relates back to individuals who use those sites?
Well, I think the relationship is a complicated one. They certainly knew what the government was getting from them because they are complying with these court orders, and that's part of the whole PRISM internet surveillance program. Unfortunately, we don't know to the extent to which this partnership really applies. You know, we found out bits and pieces of information from Edward Snowden, but a lot of it remains a mystery. The number one thing that remains a mystery is how many users these broad FISA court orders affect. And the companies actually want to tell the American public exactly how many people they affect so they can actually prove that there's no mass surveillance going on the internet like it is with our phone system. And unfortunately, the government has been blocking them at every respect. The companies say they have a First Amendment right to do this and have actually petitioned the FISA court to categorically say that they are allowed by their free speech rights to tell the American public how many of these surveillance orders they are and how many people they affect. And so far, the government has been fighting them tooth and nail on this.
So, Fred, where do you think change is really going to come from, if it does come? Is it going to come from companies like Google and Facebook pushing the envelope? Is it going to come from lawsuits from activist groups like Trevor's? Is it going to come from, a reasoned review by the president and his people because they realize, oh my goodness, maybe we've crossed some boundaries here?
Well, it may come from all of those. I think the fact that industry seems quite engaged right now and seems to be suffering under the international pressure coming from countries and companies outside of the United States is likely to cause industry to be more interested in finding a solution here. And that may be what makes the difference, because public pressure alone probably isn't enough to move Congress on these issues. But when you get public pressure and industry pushing in the same direction, that can make a difference. There are a number of lawsuits pending. EFF has filed many of them, and they're not only providing us with more information, they're also increasingly making clear how dishonest the intelligence enterprise and those who oversee them have been with the American public. And I think that's one thing that almost everybody can understand. It doesn't matter whether you're pro-security or pro-privacy or all over the place. You understand the notion of elected officials and high appointed officials who aren't telling the truth and aren't facing consequences as a result of that. So I think we will see mounting pressure. And of course, there's still Edward Snowden out there who seems to have a treasure trove of documents that somehow the NSA wasn't even able to account for and doesn't even know what he has. But every week, all summer long, has brought a new set of revelations. So I suspect we're not done yet.
Drip, drip, drip from Edward Snowden. That drip, drip, drip continues, causing new conversation, new introspection even at the government level, even as they charge him with committing a crime. Thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Imagine being homeless and an addict and making the decision to get clean, only to find that the system designed to help you is actually banking on your addiction. That's what some recovering addicts discovered at one Brooklyn treatment center. And joining us now is investigative reporter and Pulitzer Prize winner Jake Bernstein, who uncovered a rehab system of kickbacks and shoddy care. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I want to start by reading a little bit of what the main person you followed, Lillian Imbert, found in her treatment clinic. Quote from your article, Fellow patients appeared to nod out in group therapy sessions that she found repetitive and shallow. They begged her to sell them her clean urine to fool the clinic's weekly drug tests. The clinic itself was dingy and run down, and her counselors seemed harried, trying to juggle heavy caseloads. Interactions with them were perfunctory. Outside the clinic, she said, a man she believed to be a patient openly sold drugs to those arriving for counseling. So explain this relationship that you uncovered between Lillian's treatment clinic and what they call the sober home where she lived.
Well, addicts, indigent alcoholics and addicts who need a place to live end up in these sober homes, or they're also called three-quarter houses. Now, the city of New York pays each of them a rental subsidy, a stipend. It's $215 a month. That's it. And that goes directly to the landlord. So, as you know, you can't really get very much for $215 a month in New York City. In fact, the last time the city raised that amount was 25 years ago. So what the sober homeowners do is they pack these people into these houses, and there are all kinds of problems with them, and they make them go to outpatient treatment facilities. And what the unscrupulous homeowners do is they make them go to specific outpatient treatment facilities.
And in the clinic in Brooklyn, NYSN, what are the conditions, and are they typical of other sober homes?
It's certainly not an outlier. There are, well, NYSN is the outpatient treatment facility. There's a number of sober homes that are funneling patients into NYSN. And certainly what's happening at NYSN is not atypical. I mean, the same sober homeowners who are sending people to NYSN are also sending them to other clinics.
So tell me this about Lillian Imbert's case. Her landlord can dictate where an addict goes for treatment?
Yes, because what Imbert found was that if she didn't go to the outpatient treatment facility that her landlord told her to go to, he would kick her out and she'd be out on the street. So she really felt like she had no choice.
And the landlord had a vested interest in a particular treatment center. Why?
Well, there's been allegations that there are kickbacks, that every month he would go to the clinic to pick up a certain amount of money based on how many people he had referred and what services they had gotten.
And were you able to find compelling evidence that that's the case?
Yeah, we found a medical biller at the clinic who filed a complaint with the Office of Inspector Medicaid General about these kickbacks, and we also spoke to other people at the clinic who had been at the clinic who overheard or were party to conversations where the guy in charge of the clinic talked about the kickbacks.
Doesn't the state monitor this system, and wouldn't they already know about this?
Well, it's interesting. There's different levels of monitoring. For example, there's a state alcohol and drug agency, and they just do licensing reviews. You know, so they'll come in every couple years and they'll pull maybe 15 patient files and look at them, and then they'll renew your license. And as we had people tell us, it's very easy to bamboozle them. They don't really look very deeply. Their audits are fairly superficial. And then there's the Medicaid Inspector General. They're looking for fraud. But there's a lot of Medicaid facilities in the state, and they don't get around very often.
How many Lillian Imberts are there? How big a problem is this in terms of numbers of people affected?
Well, the thing about the sober homes is they're not licensed by anybody. They're not licensed by the state or the city. Anybody can start a sober home, even if you're a convicted or a felon. You know, you could start one. And in fact, that's what we found. So there's an estimate that there might be 320, 325 sober homes, but certainly there are thousands of people who go through this.
So is it fair to conclude that the system is not set up to actually help addicts with their treatment, that the incentives do not reward successful recovery?
Well, it's fair to conclude that there are some serious problems in the system and that those problems are not being addressed. The regulatory agencies certainly are aware of these problems, and they're kind of turning a blind eye to them.
Is this a national problem, or is this unique to New York?
No, this is a national problem. In 2009, taxpayers spent $6.7 billion in outpatient treatment. And these kinds of problems have cropped up all over the place, in Florida, in Massachusetts, in California. There's been all kinds of problems with fraud and sober homes and outpatient treatment facilities. So it's a national problem.
And how did this story first catch your eye?
Well, what happened was I met Imbert, and I started to hear more about this system, and I was sort of horrified by the things that people were telling me, and decided to dig in deeper.
Now, your prime subject's background, Lillian Imbert's background, prep school, raised in affluence, white, couldn't really be more different from the typical members of the population of these centers who tend to be low income and black, right?
No,
and male.
Yeah, this is true. And yet, I really feel like, you know, any of us could go down the path that Imbert went down. What happened with her is she was a recovering alcoholic. She had been sober for almost 18 years. She suffered a terrible accident and had to take a variety of different prescription pills to deal with nerve damage. And her life sort of fell apart after that, and she ended up drinking again and ended up on the streets. So, you know, there, but for the grace of God, go us.
So what happens now? It's only been a week since your story was published. Are there any reverberations already?
Well, certainly there's reverberations within the community. We know, according to one of the state agencies involved, that the Attorney General is investigating, and we'll just have to see if they finally decide to do something about these problems.
Well, you and your colleagues at Pro-Publica keep digging.
Thank you.
And thank you. Up next, Curate NYC, a call to artists to envision New York City in 2025, and wait till you see what they're coming up with. Curate NYC. It's a citywide festival of art exhibitions and an online showcase for New York visual artists. But you've got to be in it to win this competition, and the call for entries closes October 1st. This year, there's an extra category, a call for artists to envision New York City 25 years from now. Behind all this are Danny Simmons and Brian Tate from the group Full Spectrum Experience. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Brian.
And we will show lots of art in just a minute from people who have already submitted these visions of New York 25 years from now. But Danny, start us off and tell us the basics. What's this all about and who can participate?
Any New York City visual artist can participate. What it's all about is we started thinking, Brian and I started thinking about what New York City is going to be like. You know, this whole thing is based on New York City being the arts hub of the world. And we started talking about whether it was going to continue to be the arts hub and what are the sort of things. And then it became a larger conversation between us about, well, what would New York City, besides the arts, what would New York City be like? And so Brian came up with the idea of, let's probably ask artists to create or look through their archives of work and see what they think New York City will be like. And so that's what it's about.
Tell us more.
Well, you know, our primary partner with Curate NYC is the New York City Economic Development Corporation. And when we first started developing Curate with them about 3 or 4 years ago, there were two goals. One goal is to heighten career opportunities and exposure for New York City visual artists. And the second goal is to promote New York City as a cultural hub, which led Danny and I to thinking, you know, one of the things about Curate is that it's a great vehicle for artists and for curators and for galleries, but we've increasingly gotten interest and commentary from just the general public of people who are interested in art. And we wanted to really dig into that this year, and we thought, let's create a sort of an extension of Curate that deals with a topic that just people throughout New York City and beyond could really get a handle on, get excited about, and that the artists would get excited about. And so we came up with this idea of NYC 25, and one of the things that, so there are two parts to Curate. There's what we call Curate Classic, which is non-thematic, all styles, all visual arts media, no topics, any topic, whatever, you know. And artists are encouraged to submit a work that just represents their best work to show in front of dozens of top curators. And then there is also NYC 25, which is optional and which is thematic.
Let me just, you know, when we got a lot of questions from the artists and other people, how would other work fit into this? Like when you think of seeing it, maybe you think of something photograph or this or that or something figurative. But we're encouraging people to look in conceptual work, the tone of New York City, or abstraction, you know, something, how they think New York will feel. And so it doesn't have to be a literal interpretation. It could be an emotional or a spiritual interpretation, any type.
You know-
So let's see some examples.
Sure.
Let's keep talking while we put some images on the screen, and I guess what we're going to see is submissions that have already come in under the NYC 25 banner, right? So
And as you can see, that's an abstract submission.
Yeah, now each of the works comes with an artist statement that contextualizes the artist's intentions with the work, which is especially the case when we look at abstract work.
So that's going to be the tree around the corner from my building.
Yeah.
That might be.
In the fall,
That might be.
in 2038.
It might be.
It's a little plant right
might
now, a
be.
little seedling.
Right.
All right, let's go to the next one. What do we have here?
12
things I love about New York.
And it's great to see these two pieces in juxtaposition because we have a painting and then we have, you know, something that's more of an illustration with writing. I mean, it covers a very broad spectrum of work, the stuff that we've seen. We just looked at the site before we came out, and I think we're close to about 300 entries now, which is good for this time in the call for entries.
I'm looking at number 6 up there
Yeah.
on the top. Teen boys with oversized pants hanging off. I don't know if that'll still be the fashion in 2038.
It might. It looks like it's hanging on way too long. It's hanging on way too long. I woke up at 6 o'clock this morning, 5:30 actually, and started looking at this thing. And I was just amazed by the variety of art that was coming in. I don't know why 5 o'clock in the morning.
So like this one, for example.
Yeah, they're all very different. You know, one of the other things that we wanted to add is that, you know, when we ask artists to submit a work that captures their vision of New York City 25 years in the future, and as Danny says, it could be an abstract piece, it could be a figurative piece. We're also asking artists and the public to think about New York City in 2038 from the perspective of New York City 25 years ago. So to keep in mind the events and the players who were active in 1988 when there was no Facebook, no Twitter, no Google.
Very few cell phones.
And when there were, you know, when we look at some of the peak events, not just in New York City, but around the world in 1988, from the Amazon fires to, you know, the Tompkins Square Park riots, you know, any number of events that were happening in 1988. To imagine ourselves looking at that stuff and trying to imagine today.
Ed Koch was mayor.
Ed Koch was
Crime was still going up.
And then to imagine today, looking ahead that far again, and what on earth is it that people will envision?
How about this?
You know, when I thought of this, I have a friend who just did a show about the Birmingham bombing. And what he did was take pictures of little girls that were then, and he juxtapositioned them with adults some 50 years later. And so this, I could see.
That's 50 years ago this week.
Right.
Yes,
Birmingham.
yeah, and his exhibit is on right now. And so this would make me imagine what these people are going to be like 25 years from now.
I actually, this piece is from a very hot artist who's also a great friend, Chanel Kennebrew. And she went down to the Afropunk Festival and she asked the people who were in attendance to write on a card and hold up one word that captures their vision of New York City 25 years in the future. So this piece I actually have a little bit more information about. But, you know, the thing is when, you know, to envision the future, we have to be very conscious of the history. So NYC 25 is also a way for us to not just talk about New York City of tomorrow, but to also talk about the city's identity and its character and its trajectory from 25 years ago to now to the future.
And I saw those words, colorful, clean,
Right.
new. You
Right.
put together a whole group of optimists for that
Well,
one.
they were at an Afro-punk festival, those music festivals.
There you go.
What intrigues me about this is not as much, besides the artist, is the way it's going to make people think about New York City and really give, like, what do I want our city to be like 25 years from now?
This one?
No, not this particular one, just the whole contest.
And this is an image within an image within an image.
Yeah, this is very striking work. I can't recall the title of it, but yeah, this is a very, very striking work.
And my apologies to all the artists whose names we may not know offhand.
This happened to be a friend of mine. His name is Gogh. And Gunther is a great photographer. And I just saw this time because I know his body of work. And this is really, really a great, great piece.
Let
Sexy
me
too.
come out from the visuals for just a second and ask you, Brian, what this has to do with economic development in New York City, since you're sponsored in part by the Economic Development Corporation,
Right.
part of city government,
Sure.
which obviously specializes in economic growth for New York City. What's the relationship between this and that larger goal?
There are a couple of things. I mean, New York City is known widely as a capital for a few things. One is finance, another is media, and certainly right up at the top is arts and, by extension, entertainment. And it's important for the city's brand and it's important for the city's economy for it to maintain that positioning. Now, New York City is certainly has a wealth of cultural institutions that are known around the world, and deservedly so. But it's also the individual artists who provide so much of that character and so much of that energy that makes New York City, New York City. And you know, the Economic Development Corporation and I think the city government itself wants to do as much as it can to keep artists here in New York City and keep them and stay engaged with the artists and let them know that they're valued.
2 words, affordable housing.
There is
Well,
indeed that.
And there's always a problem with designating affordable housing to particular groups. And so that's one of the things that people are trying to work through. How do you keep the artists without saying this is artist housing? You know, so, you know, how do you target artists to have
Or
housing?
maybe there are just still enough, you know, areas that are not in great shape that artists are going to move from one place to another. Gowanus is hot for artists right now.
And we're looking at East New York. I just had a conversation with perhaps Borough President Eric Adams about this whole housing development out there that's vacant right now off of Atlantic Avenue near the train. That would be a perfect place to create something similar to a West Beth, where it's artist housing
And that is artist housing in the West Village.
that's when the West Village was done maybe 50 years ago also. And so it would be nice to try to create something like that in Brooklyn where most of the artists in New York City are living right now.
New York has slipped out of the top 25 of where artists go right now in terms of cities. I heard that stat.
Yes, that's a stat that I've heard.
I've heard that's where they go, but we still have the greatest density because they haven't left yet. But they are leaving because of affordable housing. You know, my old neighborhood, the artists have pretty much moved on.
What neighborhood?
That was Clinton Hill. And when I got there were a lot of artists, a lot of studios, a lot of lofts, and now they're all condos. So
Let's go back into some of the NYC 25 years from now images. And this, well, this is a disturbing image if we were just in a world of optimists at Afropunk.
Yeah, yeah.
well, you know, and will there still be stop and frisk 25 years from now?
Right.
Will it be gone? Will it be intensified? And you know,
Several of the entries that have come in address, a lot of them address issues of the environment. Several of them address issues of civil rights and protests, I guess coming out of sort of an Occupy kind of a thing. Yeah, it's a wide spectrum. I think that some of the ones that we just saw initially are more of an artistic interpretation, but some are very
Realistic.
realistic. Thank you. Yeah. It's a real mix. I did want to say that I think this is
Frank's de Sous.
Seuss's work.
Yeah.
I did want to say that when we talk about economic development as relates to Curate, some of the other components of Curate, what we call around the base, as it were, Curate Classic. So there are citywide exhibitions. There are gallery exhibitions in each borough, and the openings are all held on successive nights, because one of the things that we found is that it's a great way for people who might traditionally go to shows in Brooklyn to now go the next night to an opening in Queens, and then the next night to an opening on Staten Island, and then the Bronx and Manhattan.
And when
And the
does
work is for sale at those galleries.
Yeah.
Aha. So if people see things online, for example, they
Right,
like,
sure.
And last
definitely.
year, we've got a number of people who saw stuff online, who got in touch with us, and we put them in touch with the artists, and
Yeah.
work was purchased that way.
And
Yeah.
when are these openings? Do you have the dates
The
yet?
openings,
Brian.
this is all at the website, curatenyc.org, but the openings begin October 25 up through November 2nd or 3rd. But each night there's a different
And
opening.
the shows stay open for about 2 weeks or so.
So the gallery curators go through all of the work on the site. So we're seeing the NYC 25 entries right now, but there's a whole other host
Right.
of Curate NYC entries.
And each winner gets $2,500?
No, that's just the winner of
I'd like to be that
NYC
winner.
25.
Ah, that's the NYC 25 winner. So
The other
that's
ones,
grand
they get
prize.
a show. Well, what's really great about Curate NYC, as Brian calls it, Curate Classic, I haven't gotten quite there yet, but anyway, is that we have at least 30 curators outside of the 5 shows in the boroughs from around the world looking at this work. And we have a really impressive list of
It's
curators.
incredible,
It's
the people
really
who come on
incredible
board.
who just ask and they say, oh, this sounds great, and they sign on. And so we're curating online shows.
And the curators are also the judges?
No.
2 different things.
That's a good question.
There's judges for Curate for a show that's going to happen at my gallery, Rush Arts.
Right.
And we pick 150 of them and turn those into postcards and show them as postcards with the bio information at Rush. That's my gallery, Rush. And then,
But separate from that, the shows that are in the 5 boroughs are the actual art.
and those are chosen by the gallery owners. And that's up in those. And then we have online shows by these other 30 curators.
Wow.
And so you have a chance to be seen by and curated.
1,500 artists in all, I've heard estimated. We have about a minute and a half, 2 minutes.
Okay.
Let's go through as
Sure.
many
Few more.
images
Yeah.
as we can
While
and
we-
do a little justice to each one.
While we do that, can I mention who some of the curators are?
You can. And we'll just show some of the images while you talk. Go ahead.
This
We
is a
have-
friend of mine, YK Hong.
We have curators who are the chief curators of museums of modern art from Tokyo,
There's a
Ireland.
New York City map in there somewhere.
There is,
There it
Brooklyn.
is.
Yeah.
Or it's an abstract painting. Take your pick.
Take your pick.
We have the chief curator of the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. We just got confirmation from the head of the Getty Foundation, which is the photography foundation. The curators are just incredible. We just confirmed,
Jim Steranko,
comic book legend Jim Steranko is going to be one of the judges.
one of the curators.
One of the curators, yeah.
And we're back to where we started.
We're back to where we started. So if you're an artist in New York City, if you have a residence or a studio in New York City, it's an incredible opportunity and it's free
And it's fun.
to have your work exposed to curators of from all over who otherwise would probably never see this work.
And we're having a big curate party.
Wait a minute. You can't talk about the curate party.
I can't? I'm not going to tell them where.
Okay.
I'm not going to say where.
All right. Go
You're
ahead.
just
so
going to finish
gonna have
this
a-
by saying we're going to have a party and
We're
it's
gonna have a
private and
party.
you can't come.
The artists can come.
The artists can come.
The artists definitely
Yes.
can come.
Yes.
And they can make money selling their work, as you said.
Yes.
At the shows. And
people
October 1st
online
is the
also.
deadline, right?
Yeah,
October 1st.
it's up
Yes.
now through October 1. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you once again.
That's really, really great. And that's our program for this week. We debut a new show every Wednesday at this hour. And tune into my radio program weekdays from 10 a.m. to noon on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.